Hey everybody, Shawn McCool here. I just got back from the Dutch PHP Conference, DPC, in 2015. At DPC, Mitchell van Wijngaarden and I created a little uncon talk for fun. It was about naming things, and I got a lot of requests to record it and provide a video or whatever online so people could see it. So here it is. This is a talk about naming things talk. So it was originally written by Shawn McCool human and Mitchell van Wijngaarden human. And we are both developers who work in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And this talk is about naming things. And naming things is hard, and I get that. The way that you name things can have dramatic consequences, for example. And naming is a cultural thing. So WordPress developers or Drupal developers or any number, like enterprise Java developers or Haskell developers, they're all going to approach naming things in a different way. And so it's a cultural thing, and that's a really good because we can fix it. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, you may not like us after this talk, but we like you. So some of these ideas are controversial, especially in the world of PHP, but that's okay. This is an uncon talk, and we're allowed to ruffle some feathers. So the first thing we want to talk about is the whole interface suffix thing. We have an interface that we're defining here. It's called the payment provider interface. And we call it that because it's impossible to tell that it's an interface otherwise. We have this keyword here, interface, when we define it, that is used to define the interface. So we, might be able to tell from that. In addition, when we're implementing an interface, we have a keyword that is specific to interfaces. So we might actually be able to tell that it's an interface from that as well. And another complaint that we have is you just don't inject interfaces. So as a type hint, it's kind of strange. So in this case, we have a payment processor, and it processes, and it may take a payment provider. It's not taking a payment provider interface. And I almost feel like this style of naming is a little bit disrespectful to the developer. It's a little disrespectful to the scope that you're developing in. Because in this process method, we want everything to be named nicely and to make sense and to fit together as a cohesive story, as an explanation of what's going on here. And the idea that we're receiving a payment provider interface called provider is a little strange. It's also a little strange that we feel compelled to know that we're receiving an implementation of a specific interface. Since this interface is this general thing that actually we can code against, that we know what its public API is, we can code against it. We don't necessarily need to know that we're receiving an implementation. We just need to know we're receiving a payment provider. I feel like this alternative is more respectful to the developer. It's more respectful to the scope of development. It's saying, look, you're receiving a payment provider. Call methods on that provider. Do whatever is respectful to the scope. Do whatever makes sense. And I'm just really into the idea that the developer who has to read or work with this code now actually has a clear indication of what's happening. There's no weird constructs that are in the way. It feels unnecessary to me to even think that we need to know that it's an implementation of an interface and not just a payment provider. So to me, this comes with a lot more respect for the developer. Respect. And interfaces aren't even special. They're like this more general implementation of a specific concept. So to me, the implementation of an interface is more specific. It's more special. Interfaces are more generalized, and I'm not sure why we treat interfaces differently precisely. So if we look at this, you can see that we have the payment processor class, a processor method, and then this interface. Since interfaces are more general and less specific than implementation, why don't we just start making the implementation's names more specific? So here we have a payment processor class, which has a method that takes a payment provider interface. And maybe a little bit more specific then is some of the implementation details. So now we have a payment provider class that has a process method that accepts an instance of the payment provider interface, and it stores it in the provider variable. Really, where does the madness end? I also feel like this really kind of damages your readability. So let's look at this code. I don't know about you, but when I look at this, my mind just frosts over. Like my eyes glaze over. I can't tell what's happening. This is crazy to me. If I focus on just this messy little part here and just kind of tweak one word out of it, suddenly my mind can start to wrap around what's going on here. So get ready. 3, 2, 1. Here. Suddenly I can see what's happening. We have a promotion repository, promotion eligibility checker, promotion applicator, channel context. And this is just code that I found in some open source project. and as an example of what's going on. So like this to me is just a wall, and this to me is words that I can digest. What tends to happen is you have an interface and you have some default implementation that you want to ship with. So let's say you have a package and it comes with an interface that will support multiple implementations. So the developer of the application can add their own implementation. So what do you call that default implementation, right? So if you have a interface called payment processor, and then you have a default payment processor, then what do you call these things? So the typical method tends to be just a slap interface at the end, or if you're in the world of C#, slap an I at the beginning, and then you can have your default implementation, and you can have your interface, and the names don't collide anymore. Another argument that I've heard is that you want to be able to easily find the interfaces, which this personally I don't understand because I have not been using the interface suffix for years now, and this just doesn't come up to me. Like I can tell where the interfaces are. I have tools to do so. I know what the keywords that indicate interfaces. So I mean, to me, it's a non-issue. I don't have like this crazy huge waterfall of names in a single namespace to pick out the interface for. And I actually have to know what the code does in order to even work with it. So therefore I know payment provider, you want a payment provider. It's this general abstract concept for any payment provider. Whereas the Stripe payment provider is a specific implementation. I can already understand that as a developer working on this project. That's clear to me. So how do we fix this problem? Well, if it's possible to have multiple implementations of an interface, then what about our default interface, or our default implementation that we want to ship, would be different from any of those other alternate implementations? Then we can figure out what makes this implementation special and name it around that. So in the case of, like, for example, a command bus, which I use all the time, and I have a command bus interface that is called command bus. If I have multiple command buses, I might call them something like logging command bus, or dependency injection aware execution command bus, or something crazy like that. I'm just trying to think of names. These things can actually mean something. They can actually be specific. They can represent what they are. And then when you have your code for a command bus, you know that you're just receiving a command bus, and that makes sense. The whole exception suffix is more of the same. The naming went wrong exception. Now, how do we know something is an exception? It's even easier, right? Whenever a class extends exception, you know it's an exception. Whenever you throw an object, you know that object is an exception. Whenever you catch an object, you know that object's an exception. So what's the point of having exception at the end there? It reduces the readability of the code, it pulls away some of the meaning, and it starts to make your code less a representation of that abstract logic in your mind and more just full of language artifacts, as if the languages we use don't force us into enough artifacts that we have to maintain and deal with that aren't directly related to the concept. I mean, to me, programming is about kind of reducing those artifacts and making the code more representation of the concepts. And I just don't want this stuff to get in my way. Now, there's a lot of influential people who agree with us. For example, Uncle Bob. The entire cast and crew of Battlestar Galactica, especially the president, she's a very vocal supporter of this idea of removing the suffixes. And Mario Andretti, the famous Formula One racing star, actually just general racing star. And that brings me to my next point. Formula Day is this really great table game that you can play with just 2 to 10 players. And the idea is you race around the track, you just burn through the straightaways as fast as you can, slow down when you're going into curves, and then just shift back up and keep speeding up as you come out of the curves. Your goal is to get around the track as quickly as possible. If you don't take the curves in a reasonably responsible way, your tires are going to wear out, and they're going to go bald, and you're going to spin out, and all this other stuff. So you have to really kind of be careful. In addition, it comes with this really cool gearbox. So at the end of every turn you'd have, at the end of every movement where you're driving along the course, you can shift up or shift down. And each gear, as you can see in this picture, has a different color attached to it. And those color are the dice that come with the game. Now, this is a really cool feature because the D4 doesn't have the numbers 1 through 4. It has the numbers 1 and 2. The D30 does not have the numbers 1 through 30. It has the numbers 21 through 30 distributed. So I think that that's a really cool aspect about the game, because when you're in different gears, you can be in like the highest gear and roll the D30 and you don't have a chance to roll a 1. You just have a chance to go really fast. And so this kind of gives you the real feel of kind of like driving around, and you have to choose your path through the corners and everything to take everything carefully. And it's really fun. And the game has been around since 1991, and whole families have grown up playing this game and creating house rules and variants. And so there's a lot of rich history here. You can learn more about this on BoardGameGeek.com or whatever. It's just a really cool game. Which brings me to my next point, namespacing by type. Now, this is something that really frustrates me, and you've probably seen this before, where you have some app and you have a value objects namespace or a repositories namespace or entities namespace, and I just find this to be kind of incredible. I'm wondering what is going on when we're creating these folder structures. Are we really thinking about everything as far as categorizing everything down? To me, it's kind of hideous to look at a class and you see all these insane namespace imports at the top, like 7 or 8. I've seen as many as like 10 namespace imports at the top of a class, which to me is like a huge code smell. Now, let me just talk about an alternative way of thinking about this, right? So let's talk about cohesion. It's the force that binds things together. So if we imagine that one of the most basic component pieces is the byte, the character, and these represent sounds or values, they represent many different kinds of things, and they can be cohesively combined to form statements or expressions. So this expression, where we're initializing the value of I, is formed through using values, punctuation, etc. And so this is the next cohesive unit up from individual bytes. Now we can combine these together to form logic, right? So here we have a while statement, and we have a couple expressions in here, very imperative. And then the next level of cohesion up, right, is functions. So we can call these functions and refer to them, and that's the result of this logic being combined together into this single named unit. Now, the next level of cohesion in PHP above a function might be considered a class. So a class can then cohesively combine multiple functions, which we then call methods, and combine data, which is encapsulated privately inside the class, and into a single unit. So before we had characters that don't mean really much by themselves, combined into statements and expressions, combined into functions. And here we have this whole concept of a member, and we can encapsulate all kinds of logic, and we're getting to really kind of a high level of abstraction here. Now, what's the next level of cohesion in the world of PHP? And I could forgive you for completely missing over this and going straight to namespaces, but in PHP, it's the file. So we used to always do require file names, and that's how we brought things together. But the PSR0 and the PSR4 auto-loading standard kind of turned folders, directory paths, and files into a direct mapping for namespacing. And so now when we need a construct, we can go just directly to that file, and we know that the construct's in there. However, in a lot of languages like C# or any number of languages that are compiled, you would often combine a class with the exceptions that it would throw. Because, for example, a lot of times exceptions are only thrown in one single place. And in this case, we throw a member only registered once exception, because this is a very unusual application in which a member must register twice or more in order to have a valid account. So wrap your head around that one for a minute. But the idea here is that in PHP, we can't so much do this, because if we try to go and catch this exception, we must already have loaded the member class. So there's no auto-loading capability here, so we're probably not going to do this. Whereas it's very normal for me to, in a Scala program, include the exceptions that, or if I'm using exceptions, that would be thrown in a specific chunk of code. Next up, we have a namespace that to me is really just the next level of cohesion. So I'm not thinking of namespaces as categorization tools other than to combine the pieces that fit together. So if I think about it this way, and I look at this example here, and I see that, okay, this is kind of a crazy thing going on here. What am I going to do? I look at it and I change it to being matched by cohesion. This suddenly makes a lot more sense to me. I can see that we have things that are related to customers and things that are related to policies. I can see that, okay, register customer is probably an interface because we have a doctrine customer repository, or the customer repository is probably an interface because we have an implementation here, and I can just looking at this, kind of tell what's going on. And I think this is a big improvement. So again, we constructed a list of the people who are on board with this concept. And the first is Will McAvoy, who is the anchor for a popular news show. Also, my mother thinks this is a great idea. She also thinks I'm handsome, and I really kind of respect her opinion. And then Walter White, of course, thinks this is a fantastic strategy. So that brings me to my next point, which is Cash and Guns, which is this really cool kind of party table game for 4 to 8 players. And the idea is you are a bunch of villains who just completed this heist. And so here on this table, you can see a bunch of loot, which is money or diamonds or artwork. And what is the first thing that, 8 villains who just completed this heist are going to do when they are just here? They have the loot, they're home free. What's going to happen? Well, there's a stick up. All right. Nobody wants to share. So everybody just starts pointing the guns at everybody, and maybe they loaded a bullet, maybe they didn't. Bullets are kind of sparse. And what happens is if you get shot, you get wounded, and you also have a chance to run away. So if a bunch of people are pointing their guns at you, you can run away. If you run away or get shot, you don't get any of the loot, but everybody else gets to go around the table dividing up the loot. The people who have the person who has the most loot at the end of the game wins. And if you get shot enough times, you're completely out of the game. And this is Raphael Dolms from Amsterdam PHP, and he gets shot enough times to be out of the game every game. So that's a really fun game to play with friends if you're hanging around having a few drinks, or if you just have a whole lot of people together that you want to get together and have fun with. Really cool game. And you might be aware of this, but Amsterdam has a really fantastic PHP meetup called Amsterdam PHP. And every couple months, they have a Geeks and Games meetup. And in Geeks and Games, a bunch of people bring a lot of games. So we just sit down at a table and teach people games, or just play games and have fun. So this is us playing Cards Against Humanity, which is really popular. This is us playing Dead of Winter. It's a game where you have a bunch of survivors, and they're living in a colony during the zombie apocalypse. And you run risk by going to the gas station to get gas, or by going to the hospital to get medicine, etc. And you kind of have to try to survive together. But meanwhile, there may be in the game one betrayer who's pretending to be on your team the whole time, but is secretly messing up everything. And so you get to vote to exile players, and maybe they're the betrayer and maybe they're not. And it's really fun. And here is just us playing more Cash and Guns, so that's fun. In Utrecht, we have a really great cross-language, kind of cross-everything developer meetup, and it's been really successful. Lots of attendees and really cool talks and really cool get-togethers. We're trying to put together a table gaming meetup for the attendees of this conference as well, but so far we haven't secured a venue. Overall, I hope that you're cool with us, and we haven't made you angry. We'd really like to hang out sometime. You can find us here, and that's really the end of our uncon talk.